Even though this is a virtually declarative demo, in no way do you absolutely want to do 100% of this in flow. I'm going to cover the reasons for that, but there's a lot of folks who look at something like this and think, well, there's lots of behind the scenes bits that you need to take care of, and flow can't handle that as gratefully as you would like. And they are 1,000,000% correct. I have gone through inordinate amounts of pain so that you don't have to, leaving you with just the salient parts that you can click to your heart's content going forward. All right, so the brainstorm I had, my LinkedIn feed was just cluttered up with closed lost opportunities, closed lost opportunities, closed lost opportunities, and that was the latest form of RevRec that everybody was going for. And I thought about all my prior closed lost opportunity experience, and there was one persistent and highly annoying use case that I encountered frequently. And that's with stakeholders who absolutely loved/required closed lost tech on opportunities, made them feel warm and contextual, and none of it was ever visible or actionable. So that's what I decided to use GPT with. I said, okay, well, let's take those otherwise unactionable, unreportable notes, send them over to GPT, and get some kind of response back. We're going to give it a score, have a tone about that closed lost comment, and then also some quick analysis too. So that's the one use case that's built out here. And to get all that, we have to first build some kind of GPT. So I just simply went to OpenAI, started a new account, funded it with the smallest amount of money that you possibly can so it can handle those calls between Salesforce and the GPT. It is a small expense that's required with this, but you can get a lot for your buck once you get things working in Salesforce. And to make that happen, we have to connect Salesforce to GPT. So we're going to create a named credential, and we're going to create an external credential for that named credential. So we say, hey, this is the OpenAI endpoint that we're pointing to, and this is the credentials for that account that we're using. Then comes the big piece, and I'm glossing over it in the deck right now, but in the demo, it's going to be serious because we have to create something called an external service. That external service uses the name credential to make the call out, and once it's registered with all of the JSON or YAML that says, hey, Open API, I need this stuff from your schema, and we're going to pull it back into Flow. That is a particularly sticky bit, and it's something where Flow doesn't handle it as gracefully as you'd want to. Regardless, once we've got that connection handled, we're going to find some way to create instructions within GPT, make the call out, and then get those outputs from GPT back into Salesforce. So even though I had one single use case, I was still thinking, wait a second, let's say this works, and stakeholders are going to say, ooh, now I have ideas, because that's how it works. They see things, they get ideas, you go back and do them. May the cycle be unbroken. So we're going to have to design something that doesn't just handle this in isolation. We could build everything into one flow, and that's fine. But for the next use case, that's not going to work. So instead, I thought about, well, how can I do this in a compartmentalizable way? Really, I just want that call out, receiving the instructions, making the call out, sending the outputs back. I want that to be a subflow that I can plug and play anywhere within my org. And then the instructions, I'm going to store as custom metadata and find a way in the flow to be able to pull those in when and how I need them. That way we can configure whatever we want within the custom metadata. We can have the subflow doing all the work, and then we just have one tiny subflow to reuse in any parent flow where we can create the context where it should get invoked. Okay, so I kind of walked through the design approach as I was going through that last slide, but yeah, that's the process. We've got our CMDT, we're going to have our subflow engine, and then it's just plug and play wherever we want. So let's take a look. I will begin with the demo itself, because really this is the least exciting part of it. There's so much going on behind the scenes, but everybody loves to see how this stuff works. So right now we're just going to enter in a closed lost reason. Here's our sandbox op. We're going to choose something rosy. Click save, and then asynchronously the call gets made to GPT. It does its thing, and within a few seconds, Now we have our example data back from GPT itself. It's given some kind of a score, it's given a tone for the closed loss comment, and a brief analysis about how it wants to proceed. Not super robust, but it absolutely works. So let's dig into how exactly this got built. And if you listen closely, you may be able to hear the times my head was pounding repeatedly against the desk to build all of this out. In practice, and I'm working backwards here again, this is the parent flow on opportunities. I just created a record triggered flow that says, hey, whenever close loss text gets set or updated, we're going to do this asynchronous stuff. I don't have other record triggered use cases built out in the sandbox, so you're going to want to structure accordingly. But really, it can be that straightforward. Starting condition, and we're going to run the subflow. So I've created input and output variables from that subflow, but basically all we're saying is there a use case that we want? Where in our custom metadata, is the name of the use case that we're going to get? And that'll make sense when you see the subflow. So I created a label to handle the closed loss use case, and that's going to match a get in the custom, that's going to match a field in the custom metadata when we get that in the subflow. And I'm also going to choose to pass this field data for closed loss reason over as part of the instructions. Here is the actual subflow itself, and it looks a lot more daunting than it is because we have to use flow to prepare the outgoing request to ChatGPT, as well as take that response back and parse it. So we're going through things here that, regardless how it looks, it's more unwieldy here than in Apex. Flow has done some wonderful things in creating, transform elements and making manipulating data a lot easier in a declarative sense. That's something that's a lot more valuable when you're dealing with Salesforce's schema. However, in this case, we're reaching out to OpenAI that has a completely different schema than what's in Salesforce. And that created some interesting challenges. So let's dive in. This action is the actual call out that goes out to ChatGPT. And in the interest of time, I'm skipping the named credential, external service configuration. I'm going to hop back into the external service, actually. But everything that happens before that call out is just preparing the response. We have this variable called chat request body that gets assigned from all of this custom metadata that we got first. It's taking, the inputted use case from the parent flow that calls it, along with some other data. It says, hey, here's all this stuff that we're just going to assign, and then we're going to call out to OpenAI with this nicely formatted chat request body. Okay, sounds simple enough. But when you dig in, there's a lot that's going on here because you'll see that these variables are a special kind of variable that I had not worked with before starting this project, and that's an Apex-defined collection variable, which sounds fancy, but it's really just it's a lot like what it sounds. You're just calling it from something that's stored within Apex. So if we go into the setup menu, the Apex that actually gets called is from the external service that you configure. Well, I'll go back ahead. There we go. Okay. All right. So this external service is something that gets created when you create the name credential and the external credential. And here you're saying, what is the actual stuff in the schema that needs to be included for all of the calls that we're going to make? So this isn't everything that's in the OpenAI API schema. This is just the stuff that matters for what we're going to use in Salesforce. And obviously, this is not something that I did myself. Obviously, this is something that I asked GPT about. And obviously, GPT created something that was a lot more complex than this originally, because OpenAI's schema is a lot different than Salesforce's. The problem with this is that making changes to an external service requires you to re-register the entire external service. And every time that you re-register the external service, I mean, not only do these Apex defined collection variables, these collection variables that you have created that point to stuff in the external service. When you make changes to the external service and re-register all of that, the old components effectively need to be refreshed, meaning you need to take them out of the flow and you need to build them back in again. So every time you encounter some kind of limitation with what you're trying to pull from OpenAI, and you say, wait a minute, this scheme is not right. I've got to change things to make things a little bit flatter, for instance, because I don't want to have to go through, hierarchy upon hierarchy upon hierarchy of objects. Every time those changes happen, you are rebuilding everything in the flow that pointed to it from an Apex defined variable. And it's a pain in the ass. And this is something that Apex handles a lot more elegantly. It can say, wait a minute, let's grab the schema in a code-based way. We're going to be able to wrap and parse responses a heck of a lot easier than going through it in Flow. When you use Flow, you have to use a scheme like this, where you are defining a schema in the external service. You are creating Apex-defined variables that point to the objects in your JSON, in your YAML, in the external service. And then you are making those kinds of assignments. It certainly looks sexy on screen, but this is pretty verbose. And this is the sort of thing that gets handled a lot more easily with Apex development. So this is, if it's the kind of project you're trying to pursue and you have Apex resources on site, this is a good project to work together on to help you with the heavy lifting. At any rate, all of this gets the custom metadata and prepares the response to go out to ChatGPT. And then we get something back when it's done. And that thing that we get back is not simple enough to put into Salesforce immediately. What we created was an object based off of the schema we defined in the external service. And now we've got to put it into something else. We've got to put it into something else that's just completely flat data. To do that, and this went through dozens and dozens of iterations in GPT as well, I actually did have to create an Apex class. It's just a placeholder class. It contains these properties so that we can create an Apex defined variable that has this structure that allows us to easily map the response from GPT, the entirety of its JSON contents, into some variable that we can work with. Everything that follows, again, is something that is more gracefully handled in Apex, and I'll save you the particular pains of it. But it's going through this transformed variable and assigning the content to this variable. All of those, then after the loop completes, it takes all the values from that, assigns them to these output variables. If we go back into the parent flow, we now have these convenient variables from our subflow that we can map to variables in our parent flow. And in this case, we are mapping them to variables that we are going to use to update the opportunity. All right, so that was a lot of stuff. Again, the process is, there we are, straightforward, but it involves a lot of unwieldy parts. We are going to prepare an instruction body. We are going to make the call out to GPT. We are going to transform and manipulate the response so that we get exactly what we're looking for. And then once we've got that, we can put it back into a record triggered flow or any other use case simply by calling the subflow, signing the outputs, and deciding what to do with the variables. So that's the project in the abstract. But before we finish up and continue on with questions, let's talk about the custom metadata itself. This is not necessarily comprehensive, but what I did is I asked GPT and I said, I have no idea what you are expecting in an API call. Can you tell me more about the entirety of instructions that are there? And from that input, we built the entirety of the custom metadata object to handle these kinds of use cases. So what I've done is, I've created a name for this. I've given it an opportunity. Some of these things are just identifiers so that we can pick them out in flow, or find an easy way to identify this is the custom metadata record that we want. I gave it a friendly name for a use case if you want to search for it that way. This is the stuff we actually get out. We get these three different keys, and these are the things that we mapped. And if you wanted to change these up, you can absolutely do that. The underlying structure takes it so that whether there is a key or not, it's going to put it in one of those variables, and you can use those variables in the parent flow to assign to whatever you want. But we're really just telling GPT, hey, you're a B2B sales assistant. You're going to analyze this stuff, and then you're going to take the close lost reason text, give us a score, give us a tone, give us some brief feedback. There's some other stuff too. All of this can be used for larger and more flexible designs. They're not all for this use case. I just included them here for completeness. One thing that you can mess around with, and I'll end on this, is that you can use custom metadata to force a maximum token limit within GPT. And this is particularly nice, not just for testing, but also to keep things lightweight. For the entirety of the work that I did in building, testing, and showing off this demo, we're now looking on the OpenAI dashboard, and I spent just over a buck. And if you do the math here, it's cut off right at that 150 token limit. It wasn't originally. I didn't have that to begin with, though it's actually a little bit higher than that. But the bottom line is, when Agentforce is offering you $2 per transaction, and everything that's been built here got us 150 requests for $1, no matter how much you soup it up, this is something that can create a tremendous savings over what's being offered out of the box. Okay, I just went through a ton there. Thank you all for listening. I am happy to stick around and answer questions for as long as everybody has them. This was the end of our time, though, so if anybody has to drop, I understand. But any questions about any of that? I'm sorry, window. Oh, that would have been something I should have tried at one point. Okay. Um, right. That would be a fun thing to experiment. And if it turns out that works, please let me know, but make sure that I'm calm first, because I simply rebuilt everything. I got stuck so often on trying to understand what the YAML was. Apparently, and just, quick aside, apparently it stands for yet another markup language, which is some kind of abstraction, which is supposed to be friendlier to describe schemas and handshakes between APIs. And I thought, okay, great. That does sound like it's simpler, only that's not a standard. That's just another layer that you have to throw on top. So even though it looks straightforward and simple, and it's more straightforward and simple than JSON is, it's there was a lot there. And I just, every time I made a change there, I just went back to the default of rebuilding all the components. A new flow save could potentially work. I can guarantee that it wasn't application cache, because I tried all the different tricks and logging out and switching to compact methods and such, and I would still run into the same errors after an updated register or a service was re-registered. But I tried to update the flow. All right, let me actually dig in through the rest of the questions. Sorry, I was not paying attention. I had all of that on another monitor. By instructing body. Yes, that I probably got. Did the custom metadata explanation answer that? Because that's really where all the meat was stored. We're just using flow as a way of saying this is the use case that we want. The custom metadata has the instructions there. And that's, I kind of liked building it that way, because I was just, the more I got into this, the more I was thinking about the business and how quickly their needs can change, particularly when they're seeing something new. So the more I thought about, if I encountered anything in app in flow or it sensed that I might have to manipulate something or transform, like I just thought to myself, is this just something I can stuff in the custom metadata instead and just put it all in the instructions? Because really, I just want what's in the CMDT record and any record data or similar kinds of stuff that we're going to pass from the current context along with the instructions. That's really all I want to send over. And to that point, you can also you don't necessarily have to overload the instructions. You could build out a custom GPT of your own on OpenAI, train it however you like, and then send a minimal set of instructions to a much more trained agent and get responses back that way. That's not something that I've done for this particular demo, but it's absolutely viable. Other lightweight approaches, if you take a look at agent marketplaces like agent.ai, you could create an agent there, uh, trained however you want, and simply call it via a webhook. And now, you've got the same basic kind of stuff, but you're taking a lot of the prep work and the pre manipulation and the post manipulation right out of it. You're just saying, hey, I want to I want to call out using this particular webhook. Unfortunately, that's something where you're going to have to write your own Apex for it. You would have to build an external service, but making using that particular kind of webhook isn't as flow friendly as this particular demo was. So that's something which definitely requires Apex sources. Let's see. Yes, and I did try a lot of this, just simply taking the entire JSON body and trying to use Flow as a way of formatting and parsing and all that. I don't recommend it. Whatever the endpoint is to your AI agent you want to connect, I would just be as get it to be as explicit as possible about what it's looking for, and then just build all of that into the custom metadata. Yes, and I think I really would like to try the Agent.ai webhook because, like, this was a really fun exercise for me, and it also got more and more unwieldy the deeper that I got into it. If you're relying on something as robust as an LLM to give you extra intelligence from your Salesforce data, it doesn't really feel like you should build this really intense application layer logic in Salesforce to do all the work for you. You'd rather just simply send all that in a request, wait for it to do its thing, get that request back, and then parse it. So really, this is something that you know I would want it webhook driven or some other kind of connection, and really letting Apex do most of the work. I think what this demo shows is that the general framework is something that can be built and maintained declaratively, but when it comes to all of the specifics required with name credentials, external services, and parsing the actual response back, it's a lot easier when you're talking to reliable and knowledgeable Apex resources because they know how to structure this to make it just as smooth as the stuff that you know how to make smooth in Flow. Yeah, so thank you. I sped through that. Yeah, I got 150 transactions for a buck, and I don't know what the actual Salesforce cost is, but the point is, this is something that can be built and deployed relatively cheaply. Setting the max tokens on the custom metadata is also a good way to keep costs relatively low. Okay, great. Thanks
Can
very
I?
much, everybody. I'm sorry. Did somebody else have a question?
Yeah, sorry. Can I ask questions? Sorry. Thanks, Brad, for putting this on.
Absolutely.
This might be a big lack of my understanding in terms of custom metadata, but my current understanding is right. I understand that you set it up, you set the fields up, etc., and those are the things that are getting updated. then those are used for your call out to structure kind of instructions and receive information back and so on and so forth. What happens in the case? Let's just say that you have multiple requests going on at once. Can it handle for that, or could you, in theory, or does the custom metadata record get locked, and then you could run into issues, or is it able to understand like multiple requests at once and keep them separated so you get information returned, or could there be cross kind of contamination of data? Sorry, this might just be my general lack of.
No, it's a great question. It's obviously not something that I thought about or encountered working in a sandbox just by myself. I would suspect that because this is only getting the metadata records so that it can do an assignment to prepare the outgoing message, I don't think there should be any kind of conflicts if multiple use cases are trying to hit the same CMDT record at the same time. But with that said, CMDT is cheap all across the board. So if you have two very similar kinds of use cases with different variables, it may be better to simply create two separate metadata records and a branch in the parent flow that calls different CMDT records. It calls the subflow, but it uses a different CMDT record depending on which use case matters. That's a relatively lightweight way to solve those problems. And I think if you try to compartmentalize that as much as possible, you shouldn't run into any kind of blocking issues. As far as the get of the metadata itself, I don't think that's a conflict, but more knowledgeable people can weigh in if there's anything incorrect about that.
No, that should be correct. It should be good for reading. You're not using it transactionally. I mean, to update custom metadata would be a metadata deployment, so it's used as a kind of lookup table. So that's correct.
Yes, correct.
Multiple folks could use it. Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tony. And that was the intent all along. Really, I just wanted to stuff everything in there, make the corresponding updates whenever somebody gets a new idea from up on top, and the underlying automation stays intact. It's the same way we all design, but hey, now I get to show it off to a crowd I'm proud of. So I'm more than happy to keep on sticking around for those who have questions, but by all means, don't feel obligated to stay. This has been a real getting a chance to show this off to everyone.
I just wanted to kind of point a direction with that Apex, with the external services that are creating those Apex defined types. I was surprised to see that you had to create one, because typically, now I'm doing JSON responses mostly when I've written these, but typically it does create Apex defined types for those even internal objects that you had to transform.
It could be, and so the ultimate problem was that the YAML that I was returning the way I had it set up was trying to take that entire response and basically loop over it one value at a time, so that it could put that singular value into a single variable for output to the parent flow. I am by no means saying that's best, and this was the first I had to work with Apex defined variables, really. So it's absolutely possible that there could be Apex defined types that would allow me to avoid some of the pitfalls and headaches I encountered with transforms. I do know that I tried to take a bite out of something that had a wildly different schema, and it was not as straightforward as I thought. And through all my iterations, my attempt was to get something as flat as possible so it could be assigned via transform and loop. Obviously, as this was brand new, there could have been better ways to do that. That'll now be a fun thing for me to go back and look at. I got so frustrated having to rebuild the Apex defined variables all the time.
Yep.
I sort of abandoned looking further into the Apex defined types.
Yeah, they don't interact with flows real well right now either. I don't know if you had the issue, but even when you use them as a loop variable, if you do a collection of Apex defined, sometimes the inside of the loop will break when you open a flow if you don't open up that the loop start and just press OK to reinitialize the variable. So I've ran into all kinds of issues with those just little gotchas in using those.
That's good to know.
Development administrator experience.
I didn't encounter that. My first go was to take a nested schema and just try to simply transform those into flat variables. And when I hit a wall with that, that's when I went for the flattened YAML instead. And regardless, all of this you're seeing is sort of an XY problem I'm using Flow to solve for. more proof of concept than anything. I don't doubt there's more robust ways to say it, but to solve for it. But the bottom line is that the AI agent you're going to connect to is bigger and way more complex, and architected in a vastly different way than Salesforce. And even getting it down into the simplest of variables that you can plug and play back into S objects, it's still extremely unwieldy in flow. With that said, I probably did not choose the most efficient methods. Ooh, I have not, and that sounds like a very interesting use case. I don't, I cannot speak to the requirements needed to send images via the API. Like if there's any kinds of file manipulation or specific formats it's looking for. That sounds fun. It might be a next
You
step.
probably have to use Apex to base 64 encode it to get the blob.
Oh, base 64 was pointing my head. I'm like, if I say this, I'm going to sound really smart, but if I don't, I'm going to sound completely dumb. Yeah, okay, and blobs and whatnot. Sure, I read about that on all the posts. People say things like that. Those are words. But yes, it sounds, and Siraj, you might want to talk to Tony about it, but it sounds like it is possible, and in a way that is well beyond the scope of this demo. Oh, thank you. Great question. I was using GPT 4.0. That actually is a field in the custom metadata. So you could construct, 3.5, 4.1, 4.0, mini, like whatever you want. You can actually set that as a field within the metadata itself. There's also, I don't have this shared right now, but let's see. It also takes a temperature parameter, a number value from 0 to 2 to control the randomness of the GPT output. There, it labels 0 as deterministic and 2 as highly creative. The temperature for this use case was 0.7. Maybe that means something, who knows? I have an output format where I can specify JSON or text or some other language, just in case that was something where this was being passed off to a developer and they needed a different output format other than JSON that they could parse in their Apex. That's a possibility as well. Let's see. You can include, I have Booleans for allowing null keys, having a key order required of the outputs that get sent back. I do recommend that one just because having things in an expected order that matches the custom metadata is helpful. Let's see, version number, max tokens. That's really a big one. I think there's so much potential to be able to build quickly and build big. Setting in some reasonable safeguards for yourself and then relaxing those requirements as you get more and more confident data. That's probably a good idea to try if you're going to roll out one of these on your own. All right. Yeah, I think things might have wound down, but by all means, mention me in Discord or ask for permission for a DM because everybody gets mad about that, rightfully so. But thank you all. This was a real pleasure, and again, you can do this declaratively, and you should not. But I think this provides a wonderful opportunity for Apex to do a lot of heavy lifting and transforming and parsing, while Flow can still be used to deliver a framework for as many kinds of AI use cases as the company's creativity and checkbook allows. All right. Thanks very much, everybody, and happy Friday. All right. Thanks very much. Take care.